When should you use the passé composé? And when should you use the imparfait? We have two main past tenses in French, the passé composé and the imparfait. And every time you talk about the past in French, you have to choose which one to use. And that's the main challenge when you use past tenses in French. Because even if the imparfait and the passé composé often sound almost the same in French, if you mistake one for another, you sound really weird in French. But once you got how it works, that's great. That's really a great step forward. You're really becoming to be regarded as someone who knows French. So what's the plan? First, we'll see the cases where English tenses match French tenses. So the easy sentences with the imparfait and the passé composé. And then we'll see how to choose between the passé composé and the imparfait when the English tenses don't help us to choose. And we'll see that the difference comes from the ideas that you want to express. And that's why learning French ideas is the most important. But I won't explain how to form the passé composé and the imparfait here. Now, this lesson is based on spoken French. That means that it's designed so that you can speak directly. So I'm going to ask you to make French sentences out loud. I will guide you, and it's going to be simple sentences with the imparfait and the passé composé. But you have to make the sentences out loud. Otherwise, it won't work. So don't take notes. Focus on what I say and make the sentences. And you can get the slides of this course with the link in description. And actually, this is a big topic. So here you'll have the basics. And if you'd like to go further, you can get the whole course with the link in description. So let's start now. First, when you say sentences like I was working or you were going, you use the imparfait in French. When in English you have the verb to be in the past plus a verb with ing, so the preterite continuous in English, then it's the imparfait in French. So for instance, how do you say I was working? I was working. Je travaillais. So when you use the imparfait, there's no verb to be in French. You just take the ing verb in English, so working. And that's the verb to work that you conjugate at the imparfait. So, je travaillais. Now, how do you say, she was living in Paris? Elle habitait à Paris. So, she was living. You just take living. So here, habiter, and you conjugate it in the imparfait. Elle habitait. So once you know that, that's straightforward. You have the preterite continuous in English, so was living, were living, that's the imparfait in French. And that works also when you can replace what you say in English by the preterite continuous, by was plus ing. For instance, when you want to say I worked in French, and you can't say I was working, and that's still what you mean, then you can use the imparfait in French. So if you say in English, last year I worked every day, you can ask yourself, could I say last year I was working every day? And here you see that you can. That doesn't change the meaning, or very slightly. So you can use the imparfait to say I worked. So, je travaillais. Je travaillais. Now, there's another tense that is straightforward. It's when you say you used to go or they used to take. When you say you used plus a verb, you conjugate that verb with the imparfait in French. So how would you say you used to go with the informal you. You informal used to go. Tu allais. Tu allais. So there's no verb to use in French. It's like just before. There's no verb to be, there's no verb to use. Just the verb that follows. So here, if you say you used to go, you just take the verb to go, and that's the verb to go that you conjugate at the imparfait in French. How do you say they used to take the bus when they represents men? They men used to take the bus. So they used to take. You just take the verb to take in French and you conjugate that verb to take at the imparfait. So they used to take. Ils prenaient. Ils prenaient le bus. So we have these two structures. I was going or I used to go. Both are translated with the imparfait in French. But now, when you say she has worked in English, here you should use the passé composé in French. So how do you say just she has worked? Elle a travaillé. So it's literally like in English. How do you say they have given? When they represents women. They women have given. Elles ont donné. Elles ont donné. How do you say you have found? With the plural you. You have found. You plural have found. Vous avez trouvé. Vous avez trouvé. How do you say you haven't found? With the plural you. You plural haven't found. Vous avez pas trouvé. Vous avez pas trouvé. Usually, when you have in English, I have done anything, then in French, you use the passé composé. Except with a few cases, a few specific sentences, like with since. But that's another topic, because with since, you use the present in French. And we'll see that later. So otherwise, we have these English tenses with a straightforward translation into French tenses. So then, the real question is when you say in English, you worked, or you took the bus, what we call in English the prétérit. Which tense should you use in French? The passé composé or the imparfait? So from now on, I'm going to use only the prétérit in English. And sometimes you'll have to use the passé composé, and sometimes you'll have to use the imparfait. And the main idea, the idea that we are going to work on now to answer the question, what's the difference between the passé composé and the imparfait, is the following. On the one side, we use the passé composé to talk about a point in the past. On the other side, we use the imparfait to talk about a line in the past. And that's very important. Point starts with a P, like passé composé. And for lines in the past, we use the imparfait. So for instance, if you want to say you worked, with the informal you want to say you worked for an hour, for instance. So a very short period. You worked, just you worked, and you know it's a point in the past. So how do you say in this case, you informal worked? Tu as travaillé. Tu as travaillé. How do you say you put the laptop? In the past, of course. You put the laptop. Tu as posé le portable. So here we assume that you put the laptop only once, so it's a point in the past. So it's the passé composé in French. Tu as posé le portable. But how do you say you lived? With the informal you still. So for instance, you lived in Paris. Tu habitais à Paris. So here, the you lived is a line in the past. So you say the imparfait. Tu habitais à Paris. How do you say you took the bus? But you mean that you took the bus every day. You took the bus, and you mean every day. So here, as you mean every day, you mean a line in the past. You took the bus on a line in the past. It's a dotted line, but it's still a line in the past. So you use the imparfait. Tu prenais le bus. So that's why we also use the imparfait for habits. When you have a dotted line, that's a line in the past, so you use the imparfait. Tu prenais le bus. So the point versus line is the difference. So point in the past. Point starts with a P, passé composé, in two words. So when you conjugate the passé composé, there are also two words. So we really need to hear the verb to have and then the past participle. And on the other side, we have a line in the past with the I of imparfait in one word. Be careful, I insist on that because with most verbs, the ER verbs, the imparfait and the past participle of the verb, the second verb of the passé composé, sound the same. Tu travaillais with the imparfait. Tu as travaillé with the passé composé. So we can hear the difference between the passé composé and the imparfait only because you use the verb to have with the passé composé. So don't forget to have when you use the passé composé when you mean a point in the past. So now we're going to practice a little bit. So I'm going to say a little sentences in English and you're going to say it in French. But don't try to translate straight away. First, you'll say which tense you should use, the passé composé or the imparfait. And then you'll translate the sentence. Now, how do you say, she found a cell phone? But first, choose which tense you're going to use, passé composé or imparfait. She found a cell phone. So we assume that she found once a cell phone. So that's the instant where she found the cell phone. So that's a point in the past. So we use the passé composé. So how do you say she found a cell phone? Elle a trouvé un portable. Elle a trouvé un portable. So here there's no real context, but it's a short action, so we use the passé composé. Now, how do you say, I was happy? So first, which tense should you use? I was happy. So here the I was happy is a state. So it's going to be the imparfait because it's a line in the past. A line is the imparfait, I was happy. So how do you say I was happy? J'étais contente if you're a woman. And if you're a man, you remove the ending of contente and you say J'étais content. How do you say we lived in Lyon? So do you choose the imparfait or the passé composé for we lived in Lyon? So we lived is a line in the past, so we're going to say the imparfait. So how do you say we lived in Lyon? On habitait à Lyon. On habitait à Lyon. How do you say he had a bag? Do you use the imparfait or the passé composé? He had a bag. So he had a bag is also a kind of a state, like I was happy. So it's a line in the past. So he had a bag. Il avait un sac. Il avait un sac. Now, how would you say, she put the cell phone when I was there? So here we have two verbs. So you should ask yourself, for each verb, is it a point or is it a line in the past? So first, she put the cell phone. Is it a point or a line? So it's a point. So it's going to be the passé composé. So how do you say she put the cell phone? Elle a posé le portable. And then, when I was there, is the point or a line in the past? When I was there. The I was there lasts, so it's a line in the past. So how do you say when I was there? Quand j'étais là. So how do you say she put the cell phone when I was there? Elle a posé le portable quand j'étais là. Elle a posé le portable quand j'étais là. So here we have a contrast between the main action, she put the cell phone, and a background action, I was there. And that contrast between the main action and the background action usually helps to make the difference between the passé composé and the imparfait. For the main action, it's the passé composé. For the background action, it's the imparfait. But then you'll notice that it's not always obvious to make the difference between a point and a line. So how can you do to be sure to recognize when it's a line in the past and when it's a point in the past? When you talk about an action that seems to be both a point and a line in the past, what happens? We use time indicators. For instance, for an hour. How do you say for an hour in French? Pendant une heure. Pendant une heure. And now let's say we worked for an hour. So which tense should you use here? The imparfait or the passé composé? When you have a time indicator that clearly delimits a time span, that makes it a point in the past. So you use the passé composé. So how do you say we worked for an hour? With the casual we. We worked for an hour. On a travaillé pendant une heure. On a travaillé pendant 1 heure. So when you have a clearly delimited time span, you use the passé composé. Even if the time span seems long, the only fact that there's a time span, a delimited time span, makes it a point in the past. So you use the passé composé. A year is un an. So how would you say they worked for a year when they represents women? They women worked for a year. Elles ont travaillé pendant un an. Elles ont travaillé pendant un an. The 4-year delimits the time span, so that's a point in the past. So you use the passé composé. So don't forget the ont. Elles ont. Elles ont travaillé pendant un an. And it can be 10 years, 20 years, or your whole life. Even your whole life is delimited. So that's a point in the past. And you use the passé composé. And it could have been 1,000 years. If you say for 1,000 years, it's delimited. So it's a point, so you use the passé composé. Even if it happened a long time ago, you can talk about people who worked for 1 year last year, or for 1 year 10 years ago, or 1,000 years ago. If it's clearly delimited, that's a point. So that's the passé composé. So let's practice with some examples. How do you say, I looked for my watch for an hour? I looked for my watch for an hour. J'ai cherché ma montre pendant 1 heure. J'ai cherché ma montre pendant 1 heure. To walk in French is to march. Marcher. Marcher. So how do you say, we walked for 7 hours? We walked for 7 hours. On a marché pendant 7 heures. So it can be a big point in the past, 7 hours. But we have 7 hours in the sentence. So that's clearly delimited. So we use the passé composé. So don't forget the a in on a marché. On a marché pendant 7 heures. How do you say they walked for 7 hours when they represents men? They men walked for 7 hours. Ils ont marché pendant 7 heures. How do you say? They didn't walk for 7 hours. Still they men. They men didn't walk for 7 hours. Ils ont pas marché pendant 7 heures. And now how do you say? We lived in Lyon for 7 years. We lived in Lyon for 7 years with the casual we. We lived in Lyon for 7 years. On a habité à Lyon pendant 7 ans. So you heard we use the passé composé. On a habité. So you can be surprised because earlier we used the imparfait for we lived because we regarded we lived as a line in the past. But that depends on time indicators. Here we have a time indicator, the 7 years, for 7 years, that delimits the time span, even if it's a big time span. It's 7 years and then it stops. So it's a point in the past. So we use the passé composé. On a habité à Lyon pendant 7 ans. But now let's see what happens when we have time indicators that indicate a repetitive action in the past, like a past habit. So let's see how to say every day in French. Every day. Actually, we are going to say all the days. So how do you say every day in French? But saying all the days. All the days. Tous les jours. To say to ask in French, you say to demand. Demander. There's another verb to say to demand in French, but demander is really the casual word to say to ask. And usually we say demander. Demander. You don't pronounce the E, just demander. So how do you think you should say you asked every day? With the informal you. You asked every day. Tu demandais tous les jours. So here we have a line in the past, a dotted line, but that's a line in the past. So we use the imparfait. So it's a line in the past with a blurred end. We don't know exactly when it ends. We just know that there was a time where you asked every day. And as we don't know exactly when it ended, we regard that action as a line in the past and we use the imparfait. How do you say we asked every day with the casual we? We asked every day. On demandait tous les jours. On demandait tous les jours. So we have a line in the past. We don't know exactly when it ended. Even if it ended, we are talking about a past action, so it ended, like in English. We asked every day, but we don't know exactly when it ended. So that's the imparfait. On demandait tous les jours. But now, how do you say we asked for an hour? We asked for an hour. On a demandé pendant une heure. So the for an hour this time really delimits the time span. So we use the passé composé. So it's really important to hear the a of on a demandé. That a, that verb to have, is the only sound that makes the difference between the passé composé and the imparfait. On a demandé pendant une heure. How do you say we walked every day? On marchait tous les jours. So the everyday indicates a line in the past. So we use the imparfait. So no a this time, no verb to have. On marchait tous les jours. And how do you say We walked for 7 hours. We walked for 7 hours. On a marché pendant 7 heures. And the 7 hours delimit the time span. So we use the passé composé. On a marché pendant 7 heures. Sometimes there's a mistake or a misunderstanding. Some French learners think that you should choose the imparfait or the passé composé when the action is still going on. But that's not about that. That's not the point. In both cases, when you use the passé composé and when you use the imparfait, the action is over. It's over in English, and we translate the fact that it's over in French. So we walked for 7 hours. The action is over. We are not working anymore. And that's the same in French. On a marché pendant 7 heures. That implies that we're not working anymore either. And that's the same for we walked every day. That action is over in English. We walked every day, but we are not working anymore. And that's the same in French. On marchait tous les jours. That implies that we are not walking anymore either. So now we have that very powerful pattern to choose between the passé composé for a point in the past and the imparfait for a line in the past. But sometimes we can combine both. For instance, we walked every day for a year. So what tense should we use for that sentence? There are also specific time indicators to know to be able to deal with. And there are also lots of sentences with no time indicator. But even when there's no time indicator, you still need to choose between the passé composé and the imparfait. So if you want to go further, you can get the whole course on the passé composé versus imparfait with the link in description. It's free, you'll get the access to a video series where you'll cover the whole topic and you'll practice speaking French to get used to talking French. So you can get it with the link in description and I see you there.